Hello, welcome to another HubSpot video with Ucidity. In this video, we're going to be looking at integrating HubSpot with other systems using a system called n8n. So if you wanted to get your systems to talk to other systems in your business and it just seemed either too expensive or far too hard to do, or if you've got data sort of sitting all over the place and you'd love it just to sit in one spot, this video may be of interest. So what we're going to cover is looking at n8n, so in terms of what is n8n, how does it differ? You may have heard of something called Zapier or Make, or you might already be using it, what its limitations are, where it's best used, and how it can be used with HubSpot. So let's jump in and take a look at n8n. And I'm just going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to jump onto the n8n website. Okay, so this is n8n. Essentially what it allows you to do is connect systems to other systems. I've sort of covered that already. It's like a automation system. So if you have like a trigger, an example of this might be, say someone adds an invoice to Xero, or an invoice gets paid, or an email goes into someone's inbox, or you might have a trigger of at midnight, system just synchronizes with another system. And then what we do is we go through a set of steps. So like a workflow, an automation workflow, and where its real power is that you can almost get any system to talk to any other system using something like like n8n. Now I did talk about Zapier already. So for those of you who are using Zapier, you might be familiar with how this works. But without getting into too much detail, what it allows us to do is that different systems, they open up the doors for n8n to talk to their system. And then say this video is all about connecting to HubSpot. HubSpot has opened up its doors to talk to HubSpot back and forth. So the idea being is that we can gather information from system A, talk to HubSpot, or the other way around, we can have something happen in HubSpot and then it talks to another system. So that's what n8n is all about. Now, if you have been using Zapier or Make, the way that Zapier and Make work is that it's hosted on their environment and you pay for the number of zaps. So a zap is like a workflow, and then the number of steps in the workflow. That's okay until you start to increase volume within your business. So if you have, let's say, a 10,000 row spreadsheet that you need to migrate across to HubSpot and go through a few business rules to clean out the data, that could end up costing like hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, if you had multiple spreadsheets. So you sort of like, you go into this Zapier system and you're like, I'm not really sure exactly how much it's going to cost me, but maybe some technical people give you a rough estimate, but at the end of the day is if that spreadsheet blows out, your costs go up. Similar with Make. Now, the difference with n8n is that it's like getting either Zapier or Make and running it on your own system. So you can either run it on what we call a hosted system, or you can download n8n, and you can actually run it on your own environment. So if you have your own Azure or AWS environment, you can download this whole system and run it on your own environment, which means that your costs are basically running the server. Some servers are like $10, $15, $20 US dollars a month to run. So, and you can run as many zaps as you want, or as many workflows as you want, many steps as you want, and the cost is basically capped out. So that's fantastic. Now, its limitations are that it's relatively easy to set up. So you're basically clicking different what we call nodes, or different like steps, and you connect them to each other, and you have some sort of workflow. So an example of this might be invoice gets paid. Then you have a system in the middle that says if that customer exists in HubSpot already, then just send a message to HubSpot to say the invoice was paid. If the customer doesn't exist, then do an intermediary step of creating the customer first and then send the payment details. So that's sort of how it works. Now, as you can imagine, if you're a bank trying to run like millions of transactions per day, and they have to be accurate to like the nanosecond, this system's not going to be the one for you. If you're running, say, a few hundred transactions per day and they're not mission critical in terms of, say, the timing, so they might take a few seconds for the workflow to finish before it gets across the other system. And I'd say it really comes down to volume and partly complexity as well. If there's, say, a couple of business rules in the middle, then n8n is great. If you have these huge, complex, like multiple systems going to data warehouses and talking to databases and that, n8n is probably not the system for you. So where is it best used? So like I said, if you have lowish volume, few 10, 100, few hundred transactions a day, it's really good for that. And if you're trying to get, say, 1, 2, 3 systems to talk to another system, it's fantastic for that. The other area where it's used really well is that you don't want to be spending tens of thousands of dollars getting an whole API middleware built, and you want to have control over the cost of running these types of integrations. So I would say overall, where it's really used really well is smaller businesses, and up to sort of medium-sized businesses, it can work really well. Another advantage of one of these types of systems is that if an API updates on their system, and let's take HubSpot as an example, if HubSpot updates their API, then these systems also update their API to allow you to sort of keep up to date with the APIs. If you've got really complex middleware sitting in the middle and HubSpot updates its API details, then eventually that middleware is going to break because the API is updated, the code's not, and then eventually the code can't talk to the API anymore and things start to break. So that's where these are used. So if you've got, you sort of want to set and forget, where you have n8n sitting there doing its thing, it automatically updates when it needs to update, and you don't have to have teams of IT people managing the code and managing the system. That's where it's really good. So what I'm going to do in this demo, I'm going to jump in and give you an example of how it's used with HubSpot. So I've got a system here. So I've just jumped over to our n8n system, and it's very much like a workflow. So our first step, I'm just going to click on plus here, and we've got these triggers. So we can trigger something manually. So that means that I just go in here manually and I press a button and it goes off and runs. That's cool. I can run it on a schedule. So like I said, every night at midnight, it goes off and does its thing. We can have what we call a webhook. So webhook is, think of it like when one system, something happens in one system, it then fires off a message to another system, and that's called a webhook. So this thing sits there and it listens out for those messages and says, hey, I've got a message. You send it the information it needs to be able to do the processing, and then it goes off and does the processing. There's a few other things here, like in a form submission or other ways you can do it. Like if we just run, say, type in HubSpot here and click on that. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, you've got these things here. So I can have a trigger when a contact is created, when a conversation comes in, when a ticket is created. So think of even, say, like if we got, say, this example here. So we click on Xero, it'd be like, I think they've got any triggers actually, but we can do something like listing out for when a invoice is paid, then it goes off and talks back to HubSpot. Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to click on a schedule. It's going to say every day at midnight. I can select the time if I want to, and then click on execute step, and then it goes off and it's sitting there and waiting for something to happen. So basically at midnight, it then goes off here. Now in this instant, it's going to say create an invoice. So let's just adjust that a little bit. Okay, so I'm in here now, and what I've got running is, so it's going to now get many invoices. So I can do something like give it an option to say, like it was in a particular status where it was paid, maybe authorized, something like that, and say, give me all the invoices that have been authorized, or all the ones that I think, submitted as well, and just run through the system. And I'm going to run some business rules to say, right, which ones are paid and which ones are not. So up here as well, you can also see we can click on create a credential, and that's the thing that allows you to connect n8n to Xero. So that's like a little bit of setting up, usually username and password or some sort of authentication to get those two to talk to each other. Okay, so now I've gone into the HubSpot section. So if we go into HubSpot, I can then go in here and I can do something like update a deal. Okay, so now I've gone into the update a deal section, and I've gone in here and I'm going to want to update a deal based on its ID. So without getting too technical, this thing here is showing me the previous steps. So I could actually say whether it has a invoice number, probably invoice ID. The deal would probably have the invoice ID attached to it. I'll do a little bit of snooping around to pull out the right deal that has this invoice attached to it. Then I update it. So I can then go and select, say, the deal stage, and then I can go off and select it as being closed won. Okay, and there it is, my closed won. So I can then go off, and this is super simple, but essentially at midnight, it searches for all invoices that have been paid, and then it updates the deals and moves them along a stage, and probably puts some extra details in there saying, hey, the invoice was paid on this date, and maybe build a link back to the invoice. So the whole purpose of this is that rather than the sales team having to hit up the accounts team all the time, we can have this trigger. It could be every hour, every minute, whatever that might be, that just checks in Xero and then pushes any paid invoices across to HubSpot. So it frees up your sales team. Could even send a notification to your sales team saying, hey, the customer's actually paid for this thing. Let's kick off our onboarding process. Okay, so to dig a little bit deeper, let's just have a look at what we can do with HubSpot and what to do if this is not actually available within HubSpot. So we can create, delete, or get company or multiple companies. We can search. This is a really good one because searching via the API is a little bit tricky. So you can actually search for a company by some specifics. We can do the same with contacts. So we can create, get, search for contacts. We can add a contact to a specific list or remove them. We can work with deals. I really like this one. You can work with engagements. So whether, say, a specific action has happened, you can get HubSpot to do something off the back of that, and then work with your tickets. So I think that's really cool. And then down here, we've got all of the different types of triggers that can happen, like a contact was updated, a deal was updated, someone sent a ticket, something along those lines. I like this one here, like a conversation message. So if you've got emails that need to be synced back and forth, you can just send them to a shared inbox and then push them straight into, say, a specific HubSpot deal or a HubSpot contact. All right, so the last one is if that off that list there's a limited list. What happens if you then want to do something with HubSpot which is outside of that list? This is where your HTTP, your API call is going to be your friend. This is where we're going to have to start to get into the nitty gritty. So you need someone a bit more technical to do this typically. But what we want to be able to do is have some sort of API call which sends information to HubSpot to get HubSpot to use this API to then talk back to HubSpot. Okay, so if you're wanting to talk back to HubSpot, the HubSpot developer guide, the API guide is going to be your friend. So once again, you need to have some sort of coding background or technical background to be able to do this. But this is your friend. It's extensively documented. It's really, really well documented. Probably one of the best ones I can see here. For those of you that are familiar with Postman, you can actually run these directly in Postman as well. We typically do this. So when we actually running some APIs, we'll run it in Postman first, and then we would get the idea of how that specific API call works, and then move it into n8n for testing, and then eventually move it across to production environment. So the example of this would be something on the lines of creating a new contact. I know one's built in, but let's just have a look at it. So it would be, I need to run this specific API call. I need to have these specific properties built in here in the body of the JSON call, in the API call. And then we can also do things like add associations, and it's all documented here. As I said, I always just run this in Postman first, just to get a feel for, like, let's just make sure we're getting all the details right. Run it in a testing environment, HubSpot testing environment. Once you know you've got it right, push it into n8n as a HTTP call. So that would be, I think, a post from memory, and then run it in your development environment, and then finally push that across to production. So that's a bit about that. Now, just to get it across to production, what you can do is you can actually download these things as they come across as a JSON file, and then in your production n8n server, you would then import from a file, and then you can copy that whole workflow across into n8n, and then it starts working. Or you got to add your credentials as well, and then it starts working. So that's a really high level overview of setting up HubSpot's integrations with n8n. I hope that was useful. It's a little bit more technical than what we would normally do. The main takeaways I want to get out of this is that n8n is very fast growing. It's exploded because of AI in 2025. There's so many people using it these days. What I would say is that if you want to work with someone technical who is building your n8n integrations, make sure they've got coding or developer or very strong technical background. I know it looks a lot like sort of point and click and connect things together, but we always look at things in terms of, okay, well, what happens if this thing breaks? What happens if we're trying to update a deal and HubSpot pushes back? We need to be able to notify someone. How do we manage that? How do we manage that, say, the invoice has some null data in it? Things like that. How do we problem solve, and how do we make the system robust so it can self-run and not only work in optimal, perfect environments? What happens when the data's not right, or HubSpot API is down? Like, do we have a backlog of then going back through and doing the synchronizations? Do we have the technical expertise to know how to work with the security layer and the API layer and all that sort of stuff? So highly recommend that, rather than someone fumbling around trying to click a few buttons together. Okay, so very technical. So hopefully you got something out of that. And as always, if you would love to talk to us about integrating any of your systems with HubSpot, some of the common ones are Xero. ServiceMate has just released in the last month or so an integration with n8n, which makes it so much easier to integrate ServiceMate with HubSpot. And any other systems, we'd love to chat to you. We've developed systems we'd never ever heard of, to get them to talk back and forth with HubSpot. We've worked with the common ones, so definitely happy to have a chat about how we could help and how we could get all of your data working together and all your systems starting to talk to each other. Say goodbye to spreadsheets, say hello to a single source of information, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks again.